So our moderator for the panel is the chair of our scientific session this year, J.C. Rojas, who's pulmonary critical care at Rush University. And our panelists that are sitting next to him, Yves Lussier, who is the chairman of informatics at the University of Utah, and Alex McKinney, who's the chairman of radiology at the University of Miami. And I'm going to turn over the panel to our moderator, JC.
Thank you, Mel, and thank you for the other panelists for agreeing to be here, and for you guys to hopefully not fall asleep post-lunch during this panel. We'll make it pretty exciting, I hope. We are going to do a couple, both panelists are going to do some slides to sort of give a primer on some of the things that they think are important within their own fields, but more broadly kind of within AI and health. And then hopefully spend the rest of the time we have that aren't PowerPoint slides and I guess a panelist kind of conversation where I'll have some priming questions, but hopefully at the end, maybe the last 10 minutes, I'd love to include the audience and questions that you guys may have for them, and I can hopefully moderate a good conversation. So with that, I'll have, I think, Dr. McKinney come up. Your slides.
Mel and everyone, I want to thank you for having me. And I think I see Nina over there. So Dr. Kotler, if you saw some of these slides last week, don't call me out if you were, since I think you were at the ACR meeting. But most of them are new, or some of them are new. All right, so this is an AI-generated slide. So, I want to start out, and I'm going to try to keep it to 10 minutes. But clinical problem solving in radiology using AI versus informatics, we need to start out with strategy and ROI. Again, this is based on radiology, but I think a lot of these principles are extensible beyond radiology. We need to think about finances. We also need to keep in mind diagnostic accuracy and the burnout of radiologists. I'm going to talk a lot about that here. Human intervention is really important. Radiologists need to be involved in the tools that they shape, and this has been the failure of over 95% of the AI companies fail, particularly in imaging and the single algorithms. I think they need to keep in mind the radiologist workflows. I've seen Nina talk about a lot. Costs are key. I'm going to talk about that as well. And then AI and HI synergy, human intervention synergy, improves the outcomes and workflows. I think radiologists, we need to move towards patient-centric outcomes. We're focused traditionally on accuracy, but we need to focus on those outcomes that are meaningful to patients. But as the vendors or whoever engages us on building them, we need to, the stakeholders, the radiologists, and the other people, the adjacents, need to be engaged. So I built that slide using Copilot. So how AI will affect jobs, there's three schools of thought. One is it'll augment certain positions but not eliminate them. Another one is it'll substitute positions and thus eliminate them. And another one is it will create positions and new skill sets and new industries. Sorry, I have to time myself because I'm going to go over. Okay, so if you believe number three, then HI is the key. And there has been a widening gap between the supply and demand of radiologists, which has led to further burnout. It's also led to commoditization in the tech industry. We call this I used to be in the tech industry, race to 1999. And there's this rule of 50s I have, which is, 50 to 60% of the radiologists are suffering burnout. 50% have changed practices in the past 5 years. And there's 50% loss of professional reimbursement over the past 13 years. So we're going to get more commoditization. Imaging is projected to double over the next decade with a near doubling of the imaging market. The volume, as well as radiology as a service. Radiologist growth is only 2 to 3% a year by the number of trainees that are coming out, and that's if we cut down on retirement. But I can tell you, a lot of people just want to retire when they get overwhelmed with films. Hence the need for AI. And so with this, 14%. For some reason, I'm going to point at the bottom right. I had a circle; it didn't come up. But the 14% compound annual growth rate per year. That's how bad and how fast the growth is. So it's a good opportunity for AI vendors, but they have to engage the key stakeholders. You'll hear that a lot. So the top three irrelevant or irreverent claims are it'll replace the radiologist. Unfortunately, legally, we're the learned intermediaries. You got to figure out who you're going to sue, right? And right now, you can't sue EHR vendors. But seriously, it won't replace us. But I do see us as arbiters of the AI and the algorithms. It will outperform the radiologist. That's a problem when that statement is made because most of these algorithms are kind of single solution or instance type of solutions, and we look for thousands of diagnoses, and the algorithm usually looks at one. There are getting to be some more general models and things that can do more than one, but right now it can't outperform us. And then it'll help the radiologist read faster, which is also a misconception because we have to, as you probably heard, I think it was Dr. Hamimi yesterday, but even faster than he said, when I was in training, you used to read off the Rolodex, step on the pedal, and it would go down really fast. And you would and they did the data, the evidence was that you'd find your impression in less than 2 seconds on a chest x-ray. So it's really not going to read faster, but it will help us document faster, automate the reporting findings from the images, automate the measurements. I spend so much time in lymph node measurements and so many other things, and communicating with the doctors, et cetera. So it'll help us work faster, but I don't know if it'll help us read faster, because we still have to look at the images, So I think there's 3 ways that AI can improve the imaging workflow. With productivity, obviously, there's a lot of focus on that. Quicker evaluation, display, 3D, recons, et cetera, signing reports, workflow efficiencies, dictation, triaging, EHR linking, getting us relevant data from the EHR, IT streamlining, communicating results with providers. And then there's value and quality, which documents the impact of diagnoses, the quality, coding, billing, and complexity. And for some reason, my arrows did not come over. It's supposed to be pointing from workflow efficiencies to productivity. So there is an overlap between workflow efficiencies and productivity, I believe, and also value and quality with workflow efficiencies. But I don't see yet an opportunity, at least with AI, of value and quality with productivity, but I hope to be proven wrong with that. So sorry my arrows are not lined off for some reason when we transferred it over. So each of these will be augmented by incorporating AI merged with HI. So I think value and quality is going to be a big focus because of the commoditization play. We have to either get further commoditized or start to show our value and complexity. Just as a background, there's now as of last month, over 1,200 AI software devices that are FDA cleared. More than 75% are in radiology. And these are all based on 1 or 2 predicates dating back to 2001, which are the original CAD computer-aided detection devices. Unfortunately, some of these slides are not lining up again. But what it's showing you is that there's several categories, and the risk is the higher risk categories are the ones that need more intense evaluation, but they're also the minority. So there's a lot of opportunity on the bottom for workflow efficiency and optimization, like optimization of image software. There's only 10 to 11 CPT codes off to the right for AI usage reimbursement or payment. I think there was like 6 or 7 last year. So they've actually increased that, but it only gets reimbursed about 50% of the time. And I want to emphasize that all AI needs human oversight. This slide is from Ujant Shrestha off of LinkedIn, and he gave it to me, where there's an expected growth of FDA-approved AI devices, and particularly agents, starting about now in 2025, and it's going to be growing exponentially. And there's this debate as to whether it's going to be, we're going to have a lot of different agents, which I tend to favor, doing particular tasks for radiologists versus kind of one overarching or overreaching AI that does a lot of different things for us. And then there's something in between. Maybe we'll have a small model that is tailored to me as a neuroradiologist, and will do some of what I do and do my administrative tasks. So there's kind of a few different schools of thought, but I think on one end is numerous agents, and on the other end is just one overarching model where you boil the ocean every time you use it. Okay, and unfortunately that's supposed to be up. I think all of my arrows got realigned. Okay, so there's a next generation PACS opportunity where the PACS pulls up the relevant pathology, the EHR data, the endoscopy results, et cetera, and then moves, as you can see on the top left, where the studies in red will go to the top of the list. Those are the ones that are the most urgent and the most actionable, and then making sure that those things are followed. So AI and informatics apps should not be intrusive. VRE, which is covered up by the picture there, something with the transfer, is visual real estate. It's really important. I thought you guys liked the Made in USA sticker on the chest x-ray. But anyways, this is what's happening now. We're getting all these little APIs jumping. This is an AI-generated image, but all the APIs are jumping up in front of us as we go, and it's important that the agents cannot be intrusive. No matter how helpful they are, they can actually mess with our diagnostic accuracy, and there's some early thought that they may contribute to burnout. So some initial goals of deploying AI is we have to have a target start date and waypoints. We also need to create a workflow to minimize the interruption of radiology performance. I call it the AI sandwich, right? So we kind of expected an AI algorithm just jumps on top of a platform and then you're ready to go. But in reality, an algorithm is not the same as a solution. I call it the sandwich. So there's a patty in the middle, like the AI strategy, and I don't care whether it's meat or vegan or whatever, but there's some patty that's the strategy. The platform is the bottom bun. There's a secret sauce, the blue there, that's the AI algorithm. And my most important part after that is really the human intervention and the validation. Those go hand in hand. Humans need to be involved in the key stakeholders. And just along that theme is the IT integration acceptance. The top patty needs to be there to make it a complete sandwich. And if you're successful, then you get this very unhealthy burger, which comes from Dimitri Giannopoulos. I think he's with Rad AI now, but he used to be with AI Duck. And so basically don't eat that. But that would be a successful burger. All right, so AI vendors can be very expensive. Again, sorry about the malalignment of the text here during the transfer, but you can pay for dozens or hundreds of solutions, and each solution can be $80,000 to $200,000. It can be prohibitively expensive as you get above 30, 40, 50 disorders. So vendor relationship really requires open, iterative, frank engagement with the vendor. There needs to be iterative data stewardship. And you can't see it on the bottom left. There's three types. There's a narrow point solution, like solution by solution. Like this one's for pulmonary embolism, this one's for brain hemorrhage, this one's for nodule. Or you can go to a marketplace or a third-party marketplace. You pay them some fee, and then there can be a bunch of different algorithms that you pick from. And depending on how much you use them, there's a whole negotiation. Or you can have a vendor platform operating system where you work with one vendor. This is what I do. We work with two or three different vendors, and we go and we just validate their solutions one at a time. And so we pick the vendors based on the workflows that they have already optimized or that they're tailoring to build with us. But it can be prohibitively expensive. So one success story we've had is we have over 50% cancer in our institution. So we're a PPS exempt institution. So what happens is that about 2 to 3% of those patients can be walking around with pulmonary embolism at any given time. And I didn't know this, when I first started as a radiology chair. So I would get a call from the head of the hospital, and our lists were backed up a week, not now, but back then when I first started, and they were saying, hey, you're having people show up in the ED with pulmonary embolisms, and the study was done. I'm like, but it wasn't a PE study, and this was on just a regular abdominal CT. So we said, okay, let's work with some vendors. We consulted medical, legal, et cetera. And before the patient leaves the CT now, we have about 13 different conditions as an outpatient that we scan them for. And one of them is pulmonary embolism. There's also hemorrhage and pneumothorax, et cetera. And then what ends up happening is if it's negative, they go home once that algorithm comes back in less than, the algorithm scans and the results come back from the scanner, and the patient goes home. So they stay for a couple minutes at the water cooler, go, use the bathroom, whatever. By the time they pulled up their pants and everything else has happened, they know it's either negative or positive for those major conditions, right? And if it's positive, we develop a disposition. We think we're one of the first to do this in the country. And then we already have a big slide I'm not showing you of a process diagram of nurse practitioners, training, and radiologists who, with care coordinators, used to be film file people, now help figure out where the patient is, get the case read right away. And we've admitted about a dozen people over the past couple of years with that, as well as had a number of emergency room visits. So our initial results are using the acquisition AI, which I think it was Dr. Tamimi talked about a little bit yesterday, that there was, we've got 20% more slots due to 25 to 30% faster scans. That's something I'm not talking about today. That requires its own talk. But on this point of care AI deployment I just described, where they don't leave the CT scan until it's evaluated, we're reading the positive studies 90% faster for the outpatients, about 60% faster for the inpatients or the ED. And then when we did our studies now on thousands of patients compared to internally our other sites or versus other community sites, those with incidental pulmonary embolism are getting outpatient therapy 9 to 10 times faster because of picking these pulmonary emboli up incidentally. So the last couple slides here, I think there's a lot of opportunity for workflow AI. The ROIs need to be made clear, though, with the group, with the, the stakeholders need to be engaged, the heads of the practice, the CEO, et cetera. Finance needs to be involved because these things can get extraordinarily expensive, which I think is going to be a discussion point that we're going to talk about. I think there's a big debate about whether we're going to have hundreds of agents versus one large agent versus a small model, something in between. And I really want to state that what's in that little triangle there is the next-gen PACS, cloud infrastructure, and AI vendors. And we could feel like we're trapped by these infrastructures, but I think they can be enlightening as long as we are engaged in working with the vendors, which is starting to happen, but didn't happen at the beginning. And I think there's some real ROIs. Like productivity is a definite one, but not productivity making, cracking the whip and make us work faster, but work more efficiently, smarter, and making sure that the patient goes where they need to go and get more meaningful outcomes for the patients. And I think we'll get increased retention and provider satisfaction because per diems can cost you to 30 to 50% more at whatever type of practice you're at, rather than just hiring your own people and helping them work efficiently. So thank you, whether you're an AI or a HI. I appreciate it.
Great.
Very good. I'm a hospitalist and um, robotics engineer and informatician. And I think the field of informatics that brings the data to these AI is relatively commoditized now. So when we're speaking of semantic and syntactic interoperability, it's probably jargon for most of you, but the grammar and the vocabulary of medicine had to be determined and had to be translated for computers to understand us. There's a field called clinical informatics that's done that for the last 40, 50 years and commoditized it. Unfortunately, I think our institutions are often molded in with chief medical information officers of a previous generation, not visionaries like we have at the table. We're in an economy or systems of record rather than the systems of intelligence where we're trying to escalate the data value chain. And we're not positioning ourselves in transforming data to information anymore. We've got to move it from information to executable knowledge. So I had a few talking points that Mel asked me to prepare. I think the one that resonates with everyone, the reason we're here, and which was cited also by Tom this morning, is really that we're in the period in which there's a rising field of clinical innovators in AI, and I believe it's the same paradigm shift we have seen in the past from citizen scientists conducting science. If you empower citizens with data and some have the right rigor in processes and methods, you actually enable a form of citizen scientist that was unthinkable before. And if we think back of neural networks conceived mathematically in the 1940s, it took till the mid-1980s for that field to emerge as being more productive, because it would take 10 to 20 years for engineers to train in a specific field for the art of engineering to apply these techniques effectively to do AI. And then came deep learning, in which it reduced the time of training these engineers to 1.5 years, but 1.5 years for any field, not just in a specific field. So that was a big breakthrough in the 80s and 90s. And now the large language models and generative AI diffusion models have brought this down to a few weeks. And it doesn't require an engineering degree that understands the maths of neural network anymore. So I think we're really in a position right now for clinicians to architect the future of healthcare faster and to really be rising up and taking leadership into that, rather than having, as we've seen before, electronic record designed by computer scientists that maybe were not the most useful in terms of interface and have led to a lot of burnout. Let me also share my experience. So I've been teaching AI for over 30 years at the University of Utah. We're teaching new courses in generative AI, and we have it's the oldest department of biomedical informatics. We have an alumni network of 600 people, and we have people that registered that are not coming right out of the undergrad. So we have PhDs that may come from the undergrad, but we have people seasoned with 10 years experience in the industry, physicians, nurses, engineers. And in generative AI, within a few weeks, some of them have designed processes and tools that have augmented their skill set and that of their colleagues. And for example, 2 surgeons have reduced by 10 hours a week their workload with a MERF 4 weeks of work with us. That's really eye-opening. It's really inspiring to see your peers, seasoned clinicians. I had to train in engineering and medicine, right? And postdoc in informatics and so on. And then with giving them the formal processes and knowing that they have the rigor of their field, and they put it all together, and in weeks, they innovate and improve their care. So their projects were just phenomenal, and it's really inspiring. And it's been like that year after year in the last 3 years, and every year is, I would say, a scale better than the previous year, because these tools are improving so fast. Another aspect, I'm not sure any of you knew in precision medicine or molecular medicine, Atul Butte. He was a phenomenon of research, a physician, pediatrician trained at Harvard that was then at Stanford and at the University of California system. He was the CIO of the entire University of California system. And unfortunately, he passed away at age 55 a few months ago. And on his bedside, what he's asked the chancellor and his friends like me was to really do scalable privileges. He felt he had a lot of privileges in that environment for treatment. He could get access through peers to the best, and he had been an alumni at Harvard, to the best people from around the world. Even some personal therapies were designed for him, and he obtained exclusions from the FDA to obtain, a vaccine from Germany that was designed for his cancer. And he says, this is not right? We now have AI. It's for your generation. It's a bit sad on his bedside, right? But do scalable privileges. Go to the next step. How can we have equitable scalability of these privileges? And it's really a call for us as the next generation of people working in this area. Can we really scale the privileges, the expertise he had access to for everyone? That also reminds me, I'm old enough to have seen that there were no phone systems in much of Africa, and then all of a sudden it was too costly to put the landlines, but cell phones were available. And cell phones were introduced in regions in Africa well before land phones, because land phones were, as a technology, was bypassed entirely. So, of course, we have a lot of barriers here with the FDA and so on. On the other hand, there are countries that are more open to test new technologies, and I've done that with pan-microbial arrays in Africa and Australia. So maybe it's an opportunity there to deploy these scalable privileges to communities that would not have access to physicians and bypass altogether a number of technologies. And as long as they're willingly adopting these technologies in an enlightened way, there could be a way to do proper ethical global health and really skip a level that would be difficult to implement locally. So that's where I'm thinking here. In terms of trial redesign through AI, so we're all clinicians in the room, right? Almost everyone here. When we learn medicine, I think we learn medicine with blinders. There's only 4,000 drugs approved by the FDA. These compounds are mixed, 4,000 compounds. They're mixed together to make over 100,000 products in the US. And they treat about 4,000 diseases, the most frequent ones. We know 10,000 Mendelian diseases, maybe CRISPR-Cas9 will take care of that. And we know an additional 55,000 diseases that currently have no treatment. 40% of consultation in pediatric care are on conditions for which there's no treatment for these babies, and they grow to be adults, and 9% of the global population worldwide suffers from at least one of these infrequent complex diseases. They're not Mendelian diseases. We're not treating the majority of our diseases, but we felt good when we finished med school, right? We felt we had learned a lot. We felt we had it under control, but if we look at what we don't know, 100 years from now, they'll look into that. And there's a huge opportunity now with molecular redesign of drugs to position them for diseases that are infrequent. However, there's a big market problem. The blockbuster model of pharmaceuticals require a half billion to $1 billion market to support a year of revenue, to support the phase 3 clinical trials that also cost $500 million. So one aspect my group has been working on, and if we have time later I can show slides, but I'll go back and sit with the panel, is to reduce by about 5-fold the cost of clinical trials that are amenable to omics, dynamic omics studies. So we've developed single subject studies in omics with 2 samples, where you can reduce the cost of classifier development to a fifth, the cost of clinical trials to a fifth. We've even shown in prospective clinical trials that a single patient can validate a case cohort study. And you're saying, why would you ever do that in your sane mind? Well, if you're speaking of a rare and infrequent disease in which, for example, I've been funded in a lethal form of valley fever called disseminated valley fever, it took 12 years to recruit 50 patients. You can understand now that it's elegant to look at all the biases for gender, age, and so on, but we can't barely detect them because they're so rare and infrequent. But people migrate in these regions of Southern Cal, New Mexico, Southern Arizona, Mexico, and there's a chance of 500 they may suffer from a disease that's lethal and is treated for a lifetime with an antifungal agent. So can we develop classifiers which traditionally would take hundreds of patients with a mere cohort of 50? So those are the questions we're asking ourselves. And can you do clinical trials and even have just a case control study of a very small group that would otherwise be underpowered by traditional statistics be validated by a single patient? And the answer is yes. There are techniques now in which we can do that. So there's ways to redesign trials with AI as well that go further and in ways we didn't think were possible 20 years ago. And so I'll leave you on that. Also, these methodologies that have been developed for understanding individuality can scale back and inform on what I would call treatment of the average. So these blockbuster models give you drugs that work in 70% of patients, because you probably know that, right? In cardiology, that are probably the best drugs we've got, it's about 70, the drugs work in about 70% of patients. And an anti-hypertensive drug has about that level of accuracy. Propranolol, 50% in women, 30% African American per me. So somehow we can then take back these technologies that can even improve understanding our drugs and treatments that are made for the average and be more precise with them. So all of these are novel developments of AI that can improve our care. Thank you.
Thank you both for kind of priming potentially this conversation. So I think one thing I really wanted to start with, which we've talked about, I think, in many of the sessions, maybe indirectly, is I'll give you an anecdote about where I work. So I work at Rush here in Chicago, and we just did a survey of our entire university, which is mostly allied health professional programs, and obviously our hospital system, which is 3 hospitals in the metro area. And kind of the key takeaway for us as people doing data science, AI, informatics, is that the vast majority of our students and faculty and clinicians want more AI training, but they felt like Rush was not providing it. Something along the lines of about 99% felt like they didn't have enough training to use the tools that we were providing them. So kind of the first questions I have for the panelists is, you mentioned this regarding Utah and sort of skilling people in a 2 or 3 week period of time to sort of augment their workflow. If both of you could speak on kind of that transition from curiosity about AI and the intersection with whatever you're doing in health, whether that be on the back end, like a rev cycle person or a front end surgeon doing something in the operating room, and what kind of programs can we design as leaders in this space to skill people to start using these tools effectively?
Yes. So I've been involved in the education of AI and informatics for over 30 years through Columbia University, the University of Chicago, Illinois, Arizona, and now Utah. We've developed a program of PhD, MD PhD in AI. That takes 8 years at the University of Utah. And on top of that, MD MSc, which takes only a year more than the MD. In the last 4 years, and then also certificate programs which have micro certification, and it starts as small as a 2-day workshop. You may think it's really hard to develop all the understanding of the maths. They're not required anymore. How many of us how to know how to repair a car, right? The cars have become quite complex, yet we can all drive them. What opened my eyes was a high school student. There was a young lady, 11th grade, that wanted to be mentored in AI, and she had never taken even a course of programming, but I knew she came from a program that was very rigorous and she was a talented student. So I found her a mentor. I didn't have the time that taught her programming and machine learning in the same summer. And afterwards, she would come and somehow positively, enthusiastically shame my peer physicians and PhD students and others by showing them in a program, a methodology of teaching I found that in which we could do in a 2-day workshop the training we needed in ML for any administrator, staff, or physician. And that was at the University of Arizona. That was deployed, and we probably tried 500 people. The system is called Orange, and it's about as easy to use as Excel. The difficulties that you need to know are your limits. Otherwise, you can do a lot of bad things with it. But it's pretty phenomenal. A little bit like teaching Excel to someone. It's not very difficult. And in 2 days, you can bring them to a very high level of skill set. And we'd give the guardrails and teach them when they need to ask for help. And I think it advanced them quite a bit. And I still remember we had CMIOs that would come from different hospitals in Phoenix to come train with us because the 2-day period would really accelerate them. So there are definitively methodologies and training opportunities that have changed. And what it requires is the leadership to shake up the institution. We can't think of it in 3 credit and 1 credit courses of a semester long. We really have to rethink in terms of what the market is requiring and the smallest denominator, not the maximum revenue we can make out of that, right? But the smallest denominator to give them the competencies. So I'm really proud to be in an institution that allowed us to that flexibility, which really challenges a lot of administrators that have a boilerplate, pigeonhole way of looking at education.
Thanks. So I think it was a really good question about how do we kind of inculcate or make an institution that curiosity institution, but how do we also foster it, right? I think so. It's very tempting because we often say as physicians or clinicians, like, I used to do it this way, and that's all blown away now, right? So I think, particularly in my position as a chair, you have people saying, hey, Dr. McKinney, can I meet about this, can I do that? And you really have to have frameworks outside of radiology, just in general for medicine, to foster that sentiment of curiosity amongst, students. I have high school students, approach me now, medical students. I think it starts early. And then, whether it's radiology or outside of radiology, I really believe that programs are, they haven't, but I think they are mandated. They're going to start mandating them. Boots on the ground. What we do is we do have our trainees get involved in research projects or QI projects that involve AI, but I believe it's going to be a bit different in the future because I kind of think where it's going is you might have an agent starting in medical school or residency or whatever, and it will be tailored to what workflow and towards your rotations and things. And I think we're not really training or teaching what these agents can do yet because we were all taught. I think about large language models. You're going to boil the ocean every time you do everything for us. And now we found out that boiling the ocean is kind of a bad idea because every time we make one of these queries, it's like 50 cc's of water up in smoke, right? Or some number. Sustainability. So I think agents are going to kind of get us. That's just my opinion. But I don't think we've really institutionalized that yet to foster that curiosity. But certainly, I ask everybody here, and and as the people that to really kind of continue to foster that sentiment of curiosity amongst the let's just say youngsters, or those that are coming out. Because honestly, I think they're gonna, just like I'm finding out about AI is finding drug solutions that we've been messing around with for 50 years, and it just takes propranolol or whatever. It changes 1 OH molecule, and now it's a new drug for kidney disease or something, or whatever it is, right? I think these new graduates out of medical school and PhDs are really going to find solutions that we've banged our head around to, particularly in radiology, for the last 20 or 30 years. But we have to foster the sentiment, not be the old, kind of very staid and unchanging. So medicine is generally not agile field. I think we need to be much more agile and foster the sentiment of curiosity in medical school and training.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think a couple lessons learned from our early journey at Rush on this same topic of sort of just upskilling both clinicians, nurses, bedside providers, but also kind of people who work in the organization. What I have found anecdotally is actually smaller groups or pods. If say your large language model of choice is Copilot, which it is for us at Rush, having a smaller session. So I did this for my pulmonary clinic, where I had the MAs, the nurses, and the clinic manager just kind of go through a couple of pain points before we did anything with AI, and then had them ideate about, how would you do this differently if you had an assistant? And so we just spent an hour. It was an hour of my time where we talked about prompt engineering, context engineering, a few other things that were totally buzzwords to them before, and they were like, this computer, I talk to it, gives me the wrong answer, I'm scared. After that, we had 1 hour session. Now I have 2 out of those 4 nurses use Copilot in their daily practice every day. So I think some of it's also local. I think it's really just sort of understanding that a lot of this learning is going to be on-the-job pragmatic training, but also providing some sense of a framework for those managers, those clinicians who really want to upskill their team in sort of those smaller pods, I think has been effective. We've been trying to also think about, asynchronous learning and like things like LinkedIn Learning, a bunch of the other online platforms that may help people learn outside of the job. But in all honesty, people are busy at work, and sometimes those do or don't work. But at least it's a skill that we're trying to at least say, hey, if you want to use this asynchronously, you have this access to this platform. So I don't think we have the answer yet, but I do think it's going to be an important question for us as a field to sort of inculcate this type of curiosity, training to the first year medical student the first day, all the way up until someone who's been in practice for 30 years, who's still trying to be effective and be more efficient, like you mentioned in your talk, but just needs to have some help getting there and sort of seeing how AI may be able to help. At the same time, to your point earlier in your talk, not having so many distractions and having AI be the new version of CDS. And where you're, now no one who's a clinician likes a BPA or OPA, as Epic calls it. And unfortunately, that's the best way we know how to sort of say, hey, think about this. But it gets in the way of a workflow, right? So what we can't do, I think, is in doing what we're doing now with AI is to find a way to do it better, where it's like an agent, like you said. So sort of your assistant that you're actually willing to talk to, as opposed to your assistant that actually just gets in the way of what you want to do. And then even if it's a great assistant, is telling you exactly what you want at the right time, at the right patient for the right clinical scenario, you ignore it because you're in the middle of doing something important. I think that's something that education may help get us there, but I think it's one of a variety of things we'll try. So the next couple questions I think that are really important that we've talked about a little bit in the governance talk across the way when I was here for critical care. We have a few questions. Yeah, does anyone have any specific questions? And I'm happy to kind of see if anyone out there with a mic has a question. We can do that, and then if not, and I have a few questions I can come up with as well.
Yeah.
Hello, this is Tony Marinelli. I have a question.
Oh, all right, Tony, go ahead.
Providers in this country are often paid by RVUs. The RVUs have a professional component, which is time, the complexity, and the anxiety of the procedure. There's a technical component, which is the institution owns the scanner and maybe the AI overlay. If the number of radiologists are reading more films, I see a day where the payers, Medicare and Blue Cross, say we'll pay the radiologist less per reading and we'll pay the institution more for the technical component. This works great if the providers own the institution that does the scanning, the radiologist own the building. But do you envision that this could happen? I think it's very likely.
All right, Tony, I'll hand it over to my friendly radiologist down the way here.
Sorry, Tony, I caught the first half. What was the question on the second part? What was the question on the second part?
I think it was, Tony, the question was essentially RVU and increasing number of scans because of AI. And if you
have the same number of radiologists reading more procedures, which means they're reading them faster unless they're spending more hours and getting more burned out. Yes, so if they're spending less time with AI's help to read a film, then if you paid them the more per each reading, then the cost of the professional component would go up. And in Medicare, that they want a zero-sum game. So they will decrease the amount for the radiologist and increase the amount for the technical component because it's more expensive to have the AI overlay on top of the.
You got it, Tony. Thank you.
Yeah, so let me give it back. So there's a professional component and a technical component for, I promise you get Nina up here to talk about this.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when you own a scanner, not you, but usually your hospital, but it could be a radiology group too. There's a technical component you pay for that's not fixed. They had a big decrease, I think it was about 2008, 2009, Nina probably knows something. And then it hasn't really been cut much since then, but the professional that I was talking about, professional fees had decreased over the last 10 to 15 years at a rate of 2 to 3% a year, which was on my slides. So it's about half what it used to be. So I think what the question was a really good question, is that so since the professional fees are budget neutral, and I think most years, the last 5 years, actually, the money that went from radiology was actually strangely one-to-one to anesthesiology. It didn't go direct to anesthesiology, just anesthesiology, but others like ophthalmology benefit, et cetera. Maybe cardiology at some point. So radiologists went down. So the question is so you can't kind of mix those two pots together by the Sunshine Act or whatever it's called. But what you can do as a radiology group, because more and more radiologists are not working for their own group, and they're working for hospital systems or for private equity or whatever. And so what ends up happening is that, in my opinion, is that a hospital can give you some of those increasing technical fees he's talking about. So it's a complex question. The technical reimbursement that's going up because the volume's doubling, so they're going to make more money, right? So if my professional component is going down, and this probably translates to other fields like cardiology, which cardiology also went down, by the way, a lot. So what ends up happening is that you can get paid, though, by the hospital systems for various directorships, quality, accreditation. You can get non-clinical time, administrative time. They just can't pay you more on the professional side to read the health, but there's other ways to build it into the physician plan, and I'm not an expert at that. So I do believe there's opportunity to, hey, go ahead, Nina. Please jump in here and save me.
Yeah.
That's a tough question.
I know. My other resident radiologist.
Hey, it's a fantastic question and really important for us to be forward thinking about these things. I think it will take a little while for it to get there because the future is here, but it's not equally distributed. By the time it gets equally distributed, that's when CMS starts making changes. But it will happen. And what are we going to do when it happens? I think what's happening now is that radiology practices, even in the current environment, because reimbursements are going down, even without CMS cutting us more, they are going to hospitals for subsidies, and hospitals are giving subsidies to radiology departments. What I think needs to happen in the future is we need to create CPT codes that are associated with the additional work that we're doing because we have AI. In my practice, we do a massive amount of work that's not compensated to validate the AI, to oversee it, to oversee the RAS, continuously monitoring it, education. There's all kinds of things that we're doing that's currently not a CPT code. So I asked the American College of Radiology to form a commission so we can start talking about this to create what I'm calling AI adjacent CPT codes. And I need to be on that committee. That committee is meeting October 2nd as the first meeting. So we'll start creating these AI adjacent CPT codes just to future-proof the specialty, because if we're going to get paid less for the things that we're doing today, we should at least get paid for the things that we're also doing just because we have AI.
Any other questions out in the
Just
or comments?
That was really good. I can yell.
Okay.
What Nina said was really important. I think that's a great idea. Now, remember, that's on the technical side, and right now there's only like 10 or 11, and last year was like 5. So I think it's a great opportunity. They're only paying for about 30 to 40 or 50% of those reimbursement right now, and because it's category 3. But it's a great idea, and I hope what you're trying to do, Nina, is successful. I'm with it. Oh, professional. Okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to bring another point. So across specialties, the question is, if AI reduces the time and effort you put, and you can increase your productivity, especially specialties where the technical fees is accrued by a different entity. You're not making money out of that. You're now generating 4 or 5 times the revenue somewhere else, yet you hold 4 or 5 times the liability as a clinician, right? So there's something that goes across. So those are social, technical, implementation science issues that in which AI could disrupt completely the marketplace, and it would be disadvantageous to continue to practice as a radiologist, and you'd better be an investor in radiological equipment.
Yeah. I'm not going to comment on either radiology things, but what I will say though is I think to this point around shifting work and kind of efficiency and how AI may change that, I think what is unique in radiology is I think because most of the FDA approved algorithms are in the radiology space, there's a level of maturity where you guys are thinking about CPTs, even if there's 9 or 11 now. Whereas, for example, me as an ICU doctor, even if we do use AI in our point of care ultrasound, or we do use AI in some ventilators algorithm, or some CDS tool that's firing in our EHR, there isn't a CPT code for me, validating that and or using that. It's just sort of part of the time I'm spending with the patient, right? So I think that is a good question that Tony raised, is that as things change, and this may not just be a radiology problem, it may start in radiology, but this may be something that may trickle down into other specialties that are, having AI augment the workflow such that potentially you might be faster or more productive, or might be making a better clinical decision. And how does that change a CPT code? I think none of us know where that's going, but I think thinking about it and planning ahead, I think, is important for us as a variety of specialties as clinicians. Is there any other?
This topic is just for, as you say, just for radiology or just for reimbursement. It's for the whole field of what AI will replace in jobs or change jobs. And it actually is a good topic for future conferences, because almost every profession is going to have some changes. Accountants, are they going to get the same reimbursement if AI does their tax instead of them, et cetera, lawyers and so forth. So it's a broad issue that should be addressed and should be discussed in a future meeting.
Any other questions?
I also think too to look beyond CPT codes, because I just from experience, when I do look at the CPT code and I see the patient's pictures like throughout the chart of the journey, it's not every patient is created equal, and so I've seen where CPT attached, like appendectomy, if you will, it's attached, and the patient isn't a really standard patient, obesity, smoker, all these things, right? And it's like it transfers over into a CPT code that gets assigned to a patient to like that's sick or not sick. So it'd be interesting to see what the future holds in this space, but I feel like painting a broader picture of the patient where it makes sense, I think where we need to look and start to kind of think, what defines a CPT code and what goes into that, I think will really help us in the future. So.
I think we have a quick comment.
I want to comment. That's a really good. Sorry you waited so long. And Nina corrected me. It was a professional CPT coach. So sorry, Nina. But that's a really good point. And you know why? So most people don't know this, but radiologists are one of the few physicians that actually don't ever look at diagnosis codes, right? So we don't even know what happens usually after the fact, except maybe Nina, what happens with their radiologists and is what it's used for. So the CPT codes don't really correlate with what's going on with the patient. So I'm not going to give the talk here, but I have another talk that we do with the ACR that talks about the relevance of the study and the impact directly from imaging and your favorite thing, CDS and appropriateness of use. Yeah. And the problem is these CDS things, I used to do this as an informaticist, they're very like pick listing, right? And so when they first started, it was like pick the first thing at top list, ataxia, just so head CT gets paid for, right? So that was appropriateness, but we're moving into this thing with the ACR of relevance. Like, what are the patient's underlying are they a vascular path, diabetic, what is it with this patient that would predispose towards this thing? And so I think what's going to happen over the next 10 years is as we start using ICD codes, and we have a whole medical imaging life cycle that we've built to look at like what happens from this study downstream. We didn't have hospitals talking with each other 5 or 10 years ago. Now we via various EHR vendors. They're starting to, I'll just say. Starting to
Various?
talk to each
I
other.
think there's only one.
There's a lot of duplication of imaging. So we're going to start to see the relevance of imaging, the real population health aspects. And I think the good news is like some of what Nina was talking about, like CPT codes and things with for professional side is we can start to show the effect of both the imaging, done for the right in 5 hours, right? I heard you quoting it. Right reason, right patient, right time, right exam, right something. So all those will happen, and right now they're not happening. So I think AI is going to help us with that, and I think it's also going to help change our workflows as we talked about earlier. So it's a really good observation. We're focusing on CPT codes, but not really ICD codes or for pathology, low-ink, IMG codes and Epic, SNOMED. We go down the list of things that should be linked together, and the association should be made to see where the impact is really made. I'm using imaging, but we could be talking about pathology, cardiology, endoscopy, whatever.
Anyone else have a question? If not, I have a. Okay, perfect.
Oh, you see it?
I am a cardiologist, and I know that you mentioned that this thing with imaging is going to trickle down to all of the specialties, and I think it already has. Cardiology, we do a lot of imaging as well, and we have CPT codes for some of these AI things, especially CTFFR and AI block analysis. And the bulk of that is a technical fee, like you said, because right now what we do is we have to send the study to the vendor, and the vendor actually has humans that do part of that segmentation before it goes into the AI algorithm, and they get the results out of it, and then they send it to us. So that's a huge fee. But now, as things are changing, there are now vendors coming into the picture that don't have this exchange where we have to send pictures to them at the end to have humans do the segmentation. It's entirely on site. And that whole process is done in a few minutes, and it's just left to the cardiologist or the radiologist who's interpreting that block analysis to make sure that everything is correct, the segmentation, the final result, all of that. So that CPT code, which, yes, exists for block analysis, when you even just look at how it's going to change from the vendors as they were doing it up until now to how they're going to do it in the future or already doing it, it's very different. Because that whole component is going to be done by the reading physician, not by the technical folks at all.
Good point. Does anybody know what the most commonly built CPT code for AI is? Because we keep talking about imaging and radiology. Somebody just said it?
Diabetic right now.
Exactly, it's not imaging. The vast majority are actually diabetic right now. That's right.
Diabetic retinopathy.
We have 5 minutes left. I'll probably just ask the panelists to answer maybe one quick kind of anecdote of where they think things are going in the next year, and then maybe where do you think things will be in the next 5 years as far as AI in your specialty or in healthcare more broadly. Moving so fast.
Next year. Okay. Clearly, there'll be a lot of biologicals coming out of due to generative AI, right? You're aware of the 2 Nobel laureates last year. One was for deep learning, and two Nobels in AI, and the other one was for these molecular design. The second one was actually a twofold Nobel laureate in which there was 2 types of generative learning. One of them is to fold, right, AlphaFold, to fold any sequence, and the other one is if you have a pattern that's a structure you want to develop, what would be the amino acid that would create that pattern? So that's more basic science, but that's the most important one long term. Maybe that's not the short term impact in healthcare, but you can really think of the dynamic portions of the protein, because some portions are flexible, the rigid portions, and get hypotheses as to which amino acids and therefore which DNA you would need to code that and test it in high throughput. And the machinery that can be developed there is generally probably beyond what we can imagine right now. It enabled in the last year alone, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but to explore systems of communication in the body beyond what we train as physicians, right? Neurological system, we know the endocrine system, right? The paracrine, etc., etc. But these exosomes actually are targeting different cells in the body. They're actually specific. So there's a lot of specificity into multi-molecular targeting of exchange of communication between cells recreated by the exosome, and that has been explored with these technologies now. So there's a lot of things coming in. So I think med school students will now have additional systems to learn about. We haven't named these systems yet, but these are systems of communication in the body. And I think there'll be treatment and physiology around that. What we've learned also in the last 20 years is that alternative splicing is not sufficiently looked into for complex diseases, and just alteration of the splicing type you may have of the messenger RNA in cell type is enough to create diseases, and we haven't really named these groups of diseases yet. And I think all of that in the coming 2 to 5 years will be explored at high throughput with these new methods.
Yeah, I mean, since we're almost out of time, I would say that it's kind of a little bit different in my opinion. Inside of radiology and outside of radiology. I think outside of radiology, there's going to be a lot of competition between, the Gemini 2.5s or whatever, and the GPT-5s and all these things about data retrieval across the record, having these overarching AIs get relevant data from new tasks. It's going to be a lot of that. I think in imaging, it might actually be very agent-based, almost an opposite end, where this thing measures enhancing brain tissue. It takes me so long to do that, right? Volumes, dimension. There's no agreed upon way to measure brain volume. All these vendors have different techniques. So you don't need FDA clearance if you build it in-house, as I believe Nina does. Am I wrong about that? So you don't need FDA clearance if you build it in-house. You just have to validate it. So I think that's where we're going, is toward agents. I think, I'm wrong. Interested to hear what Nina or other people say, but I believe radiology is going to be more agent-based, and outside of radiology, it's more large model, or really VLM, vision language model. But who knows? Thanks, guys.
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for the conversation. I think Mel is up there doing the presidential stuff, so I'll let him take it away.
Wow, this was a wonderful panel, guys. Thank you so much for doing it.
Hey everybody, John here. Thanks for listening to another episode. If you enjoyed what you heard here today, please check out our website at www.americancollegeaim.org. Sign up to become a member. Also, save the dates, October 9th and October 10th, 2026. We'll be back live in Chicago, Illinois at the McCormick Place Convention Center for our second annual live scientific session. Sign up at the website to attend. Until then, we'll see you all on the next Melvin Monday. Thanks for stopping by. See ya.